Why do cars have such emotional value for people? I think because it affects their personal life. Most people in their lives, this modern day, has a motor car. They pay a lot of money for it. And so they have a fairly subjective view on what they're buying. That's the first stage. But I think the real answer is dynamic. It's not just something you sit and look at. It's something you sit and you become part of it. You sit inside it, you drive it. And then when you look at the shape of cars, there are intrinsic lines in cars which we just subconsciously love. Their curves, their shapes, their length. You put a vertical line in the car, it becomes less exciting. You put a horizontal line in the car, at a slight tension of angle, it becomes more exciting. Hence, that's why I always believe sports cars will be more fascinating than trucks. I'm a car designer. I design cars, I create cars from sketch to reality. And really what I do is to create the idea of the car, what it stands for, what it should look like, what it should feel like, and hopefully turn that into something that people can enjoy later. Well, I was born in Dumfries, a small provincial town in the southwest of Scotland, a population of about 30,000 people. And it's basically a farming area, so it's quite provincial, and not a lot happened there. And I, at a very early age, took an interest in drawing things, drawing objects around the house, hoovers, television sets when we finally got one, and such like. And then I discovered motor cars, and I started to draw motor cars. But before then, I realized that I wanted to be a designer. I wanted to create stuff through drawing. And I have no idea how I might have thought that. There was nobody was telling me what to do, but I thought it must come from somewhere. And I'm talking about 3 years old here, before primary school. And so by the time I got to primary school, I had decided I wanted to be a car designer. I'd been drawing cars for 2 or 3 years, just learning how to draw them. And I remember specifically a cousin of my mother's came, and he was an engineer, and he showed me how to draw wheels. And that was a pivotal point. That was what changed everything. Once you could draw a wheel in perspective, you could draw anything. And so it moved on from there, and I started to draw cars in perspective. And I went to my first day in primary school, just turned 5 years old, and I said to my school teacher, "Please miss, I want to be a car designer." My father was a lawyer. The interesting thing, we never had great cars, much to my huge disappointment. You know, we had Vauxhall Victors and Ford Zephyrs, and they weren't particularly great ones because it wasn't a great interest to my father. My mother was a librarian, so fairly average sort of household. We didn't really do very much in terms of cultural education. I read books. I read a lot of books that were interesting. Of course, I'd get Autocar magazine every week, faithfully, because that was the Bible at the time, to read through what was happening. I travelled a lot to Edinburgh. My grandfather used to take me to museums and such like. Although he died when I was about 9 years old, he used to encourage me on the whole car thing and take me to dealerships. When I was at school, the art class was my favourite class. And the engineering class as well. We had an engineering class for engineering drawing. And that's really where I learned the whole principle of how to draw and how to create on paper at least. And then latterly how to create three-dimensionally. That was a hugely important part. You know, and it took form of pottery. Okay, it may seem a little kind of trite and such like, but at the time it was my first inroad into shaping things in 3D, which is exactly what my job is now. We discovered something called Lanchester Polytechnic that did transport design. And I think much to my father's relief, we actually found something I could move into after school, because they realised I was going to be very demanding on that front, what was going to work for me. And so I went to Lanchester Polytechnic, which is now Coventry University, of course, and there's a second year of the transportation course. So it was made for me. So at the age of 18, I went down there thinking this was going to be the road forward. And incidentally, as a kid, I had a book called Coventry, the City of Cars. And that's when all the cars in this country, and most of the cars out of the UK, were made in Coventry. There's something like 15 or 20 factories. Coventry was utopia to me. I grew up with this idea, here's a city that just made cars. How wonderful. I want to go there. And so eventually I went to Coventry. And to be honest, it was a little bit of a disappointment. The car industry was, of course, dying. This was in the early 70s, so we were going through a big fuel crisis, and it also became very antisocial as well because it's expensive, there's fuel problems. So for me, the point of flourishing, so to speak, was at Glasgow School of Art when they welcomed me. They could see what I could do. They could see I could draw, which isn't always that common actually, even in art school. And they could see I had a vision to make things and make things work and problem solve, which is what industrial design is about. And so I went to Glasgow and I had the best 3 years of my life. Absolutely fabulous. They just let me grow, let me do what I wanted to do. Getting to Trin was very magical for me because, as a boy growing up, I do remember the magic of Pininfarina and Bertone. I've got written letters from them and photographs they used to send to me, and cars like the Espada and the Piranha, the Jaguar Piranha, funnily enough, and the Miura. They were so exotic and so special. So being there in the middle of all that was very special to me. And Giugiaro was my hero, and I used to drive past Moncalieri where his office was, and I used to drive past there to see get a glimpse of the Ital design office, even at that stage in life. So it was very magical. It was very precious in my own mind, and it was very special to be part of that life, and to be able to go into a building that was called Carrozzeria meant a lot to me, and it meant a lot to my brother as well, Murray. But it was special then. It still rings in my own mind as something that was well worth doing. My first job, freelance, designing the next Aston Martin. You can't plan these things, so I was very fortunate. And so this car evolved into what we know to be the Aston Martin DB7. And that, from then on in, was my calling card. That was my first #1 hit. And it was very special. The interesting thing with DB7 was the first time I'd worked in a car on my own. In fact, it was the first full car I'd ever done. And it was agony. The first 3 months of this, I just did not know what to do. I was suddenly let loose in this full-size clay. I had to make this work. And of course, I was taking some remnants of Jaguar into it. But really, this car had to work. And the amount of effort that went into that was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Sleepless nights, 24 hours, trying to work out what to do to make this work. Striving for that moment of perfection. That frightened me, actually, because I suddenly realised, you're not that good, buddy. You thought you could walk in there and design this car and it's going to be perfect. No, it wasn't like that. And it did frighten me. But I realised that, if I kept working at it, it would get there eventually. Well, the one thing I always felt responsible for was the fact that this was Sir William Lance's company. I never forgot that. And if I ever have any doubt about what I'm doing, I ask myself, what would Sir William think? So I still bow to his greater opinion. It's still there. I still kind of feel it. I don't mean any spiritual way. I just sense it in my own mind. So that's my datum really still. And I also felt that sense of autocratic view was important for a company like Jaguar because it was a company that was steeped in very specific values. The motor racing was one of them. You see, I came in with a dream, a vision, what I thought we could do with this. It wasn't literal. It was something that was going to work. And I thought it would take 10 years. 16 years later, we're still going through that march. It's a bit more of a marathon than I thought it would be. But we didn't really start the vision until 6 years in because I inherited one or two items which were perhaps a bit retrospective. And so it started a bit later. But yeah, it's where we should be now. It's the right place. Greatest pressure comes from within me all the time. A lot of people say when we did the F-Type, you must have felt a lot of pressure doing the successor to the E-Type. For me, yes, because nobody else knows what it's going to be like. Only I know what it's going to be like. So they don't know what that expectation is. I do. No, I'm not done yet. Creatively, I feel I've now equipped, I've got the toolbox and going to do a lot more. That's the first thing. And now I feel I can talk about it a little bit more confidently, eloquently. It's important to understand what you're doing and be able to explain it to people. In terms of my career at Jaguar, what I'm looking for now is to see how we can take it to the next phase. We're already working on that, incidentally. There are a couple of things coming up in the future which completely intrigue me into the new world of cars. I won't say too much about it, but the car world is changing and we're going to be part of that. Yeah, you're right. Jaguars have always been about the E-Type. If you mention a Jaguar to anybody from the ages of probably 20 to 70, they will mention the E-Type Jaguar. It's almost a legacy which has been a wonderful legacy, but also sometimes a burden. And it's something that I think we've finally got to shake off. I think with the F-Type we have shaken some of it off, but ultimately it'll always be there. I mean, it's just beautiful, isn't it?